Hi, I'm Margot from Movie Maker Magazine, and I'm about to talk to Ethan Hawke about his new docu-series, The Last Movie Stars, which tells the love story of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Enjoy. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
My pleasure.
I got a chance to watch the first part last night, and I absolutely loved it. I learned so much that I didn't know. So I will just jump right in.
Please do.
How did you feel when you were first approached by one of Paul's kids to make this, and like what convinced you that you wanted to do it?
I remember vividly, I answered the phone and I couldn't believe it. And I remember pacing my bedroom thinking, I can't do this. What does she mean? This is going to hijack my life, this phone call, you know? And I tried to figure out a way to very gracefully say no, and recommend who I thought would be good at it. And I couldn't get the words no out of my mouth. And I think I tricked myself into thinking, you know how you do that sometimes? You're like, oh, yeah, I could run a marathon. It'll be easy. And you just have to trick yourself that it's going to be easy somehow. I just got my coffee and I'm so happy.
Me too. I
Because
also have that.
the truth is, what I really wanted to do is I thought I would just make this little feature-length documentary and just find out what's interesting about Paul and Joanne and make it nice. It was like hoping it wouldn't be that much work. But once I got into it, I realized, like as you saw last night, I realized I could make a whole documentary about them before they got married. I mean, that period in New York in the 50s and what was happening with acting and movies changing so much, and their love affair is so interesting. He was married and had 3 kids. Holy shit. Wait, I didn't know that. And the whole thing, the more I scratched the surface, the more interesting it became. And the more interesting their love affair became. And it started to be the reason. Yes, they are remarkable actors, but it's actually the love affair that demands the deep dive into a documentary, because their life and their community seen through the lens of that love affair becomes wildly interesting. So it just expanded in the telling. And I was like, all right, well, then I started thinking, Scorsese made this amazing documentary, No Direction Home, about Dylan, and it was like 4 hours long. I was like, all right, it'll just be be 4 hours long, but in 2 parts. And then I got it to 6 hours, and I was like, which 2 hours do I cut out? And then we just realized, you know what? Let's break it into chapters. Let's make it a limited series, and just, if Michael Jordan's last season can be 10 episodes, then Paul and Joanne's 50-year love affair can be 6, for crying out loud.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm so interested to know your theory about why Paul burned the tapes, because for people watching this who don't know, the reason that you had to cast all these voices was because the tapes of all these interviews were gone. So what's your thoughts on that?
When I first heard that, my assumption was that there was some scandal. My first assumption was, uh-oh, what came out in these tapes that Paul didn't want anybody to know? And so I scoured everything for what the scandal was. And I realized that it was much simpler and much more beautiful, which is that he got bored with the celebration of the individual. He got totally bored with being, quote unquote, Paul Newman. And the whole story and the mythologizing of himself got really boring to him. And it represents, I think, a place that they both arrived at, which is authenticity. They just weren't that fake. And they, anytime you get into mythologizing, you get into hyperbole. There's all these interviews with him that are really funny, where somebody has some amazing story that they'll say, I heard that you stormed out of the room and you drove 4 days and you threw your beer down and you punched this guy in the face. And he's always like, that never happened. That never happened. Life is actually so much more ordinary than you're making it out to be. And my life too. And in a lot of his performances later in life, he's at play with the legend status. He's movies like Slapshot and The Verdict. He puts himself on trial. He doesn't just give in to this, oh, I'm an important, quote unquote, important person. He always laughed at that. And I think it's the love affair. I think it's her in his life that kept him honest in that way. He had such high regard for her as an artist. And the fact that his acting gets so celebrated, it kind of illuminated for him the stupidity and randomness at which some human beings get selected and some don't, and how unfair the world is. And he just never lost. He always talks about the benevolence of luck in his life and the absence of it in others. Right. And some kids are born without a chance, and he never lost sight of that. So he never took his success too seriously. And I think that is part of why he's like, wait a second, what am I doing? I'm burning these tapes. He burned his tuxedo at the same time,
Wow.
Yeah, he and Joanne sent out a form letter saying that we don't want any more awards. Thank you very much. We don't want any more. We don't want to. We'll give you money, but we're not going to your benefit.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, my next question was going to be, I had no idea that Paul struggled at the beginning of his career and felt a little bit in the shadow of Marlon Brando. And I was wondering, is that something that you wanted people to understand about Paul, that in some respects, Joanne had a smoother start to her career than him? And
I definitely did. And I feel like you actually don't understand that generation without keying off what happened. Brando changed American acting, and which in turn changed acting all over the world. It's this giant turn towards naturalism and spontaneity and authenticity that previous, acting was about voice and movement, and it was a presentational style of acting that people really admired. And Brando just changed all that. Couldn't understand a word he said, and he was magical. And everything that happened after that happened in relationship to that. And so Paul's career, that's kind of the orientation point. You can't really understand what they're all hunting for, what their idea of the Holy Grail is seeing Streetcar Named Desire. That's what they wanted to do, is to be a part of something like that.
And how did it feel to learn things about Paul that maybe weren't so flattering, like the fact that this beautiful love story between him and Joanne actually was the result of an affair, and that it actually hurt people, like his first wife, Jackie? How did you kind of approach telling that part of the story?
I was really interested in it, and if I could humanize it. And we're so living in a time where we're so unforgiving of ourselves and other people, and this person is a good person, this person is a bad person. They were a good person and now they're bad because they said that. And it leaves so little opportunity for growth, that we're also frozen trying to be perfect. You have to look your best, but you can't be vain, and you have to be excellent at your career, but you can't be a workaholic. You've got to be relaxed, but you can't party. And we create these scenarios where we can't be successful, and we judge others so harshly, and we judge ourselves so harshly. And seeing that this beautiful 50-year romance started in such struggle and with such pain, that there was difficult choices to be made and failures that had to be recovered from, personal failures. When you see them, I felt like it was important to understand, yeah, he did have 3 kids, and yeah, he was married, but yeah, he'd just come back from the war. And, that was back in a time period where you really had to get married if you wanted to have a love affair. And before you know it, you have kids. And before you know it, you're 26 with children, and you still don't know who you are. And you're not dead. You've got to keep living. And how do we all make mistakes, and it's how we heal from them and how we recover from them and how they galvanize us to be better is really what's interesting. So I wanted to try to tell the story without judging anybody. I mean, think about her, we could damn her too. She fell in love with a married man. What a terrible person. Well, maybe if it turns out they really did love each other and they really do meet their responsibilities and they really do, then maybe the story starts to change.
Well, how did you go about casting this amazing cast of like voice actors that you have? And how did you kind of find the story in those like pages and pages of transcripts?
I just followed my gut. I really didn't know how I was going to make this documentary. I didn't know if that idea would work. And I knew Laura Linney. She, Joanne Woodward was one of her great mentors, and they loved each other. And I know that, I thought that Laura could speak for Joanne in a way that she might enjoy. And she's such a beautiful actress. I knew that she could help the documentary through her insight and through her work. And then likewise, I kind of thought, well, who's a card carrying icon who's dealt with how hard it is to be shoved into that position, who's political and outspoken. Clooney's in very rare air of what his life experience has brought him over the last 25 years. And, what he's done as an actor and as a director and as a citizen of the world. I thought that he would really understand, he could speak for Paul, in that way. And those are the two big choices. And then I just reached out to my friends. I was like, hey, Ruffalo, will you do this? And hey, Bobby Cannavale, will you do this? Hey, Ewan, there's a British guy. Will you play this? I just kind of followed my nose. I knew I wanted Zoe Kazan just because I knew that Elia Kazan was going to be a big part of it. And I love seeing like, oh, that's actually his granddaughter is playing this. There's something, I didn't want it to be me looking back on Paul and Joanne. I wanted it to be our generation looking back on the generation that came before us and see that we're all connected. And in the work that these actors were doing, like Paul and Joanne and their generation, was impacting this generation.
Right.
And hopefully the next one, that we're all a part of this very ancient profession of storytelling. And to see yourself in that kind of context of this wheel that keeps turning.
Well, I'll leave it here then. What can we expect and look forward to in the next 5 episodes?
Greatness. Really, I'll give you the basic outline, which is the first chapter is called Cosmic Orphans, and that's them falling in love with acting and each other. Chapter 2 is A Star is Born. It starts with Joanne. She wins the Oscar, gets married, has a baby, and becomes a stepmother to 3 kids in 1 year.
Wow.
And simultaneously, as she does that, in the next 5 years, her husband becomes one of the most giant movie stars that ever lived. He as Hustler, HUD, Cool Hand Luke, his star explodes. And then the third chapter deals with the kind of legendary status that Paul Newman becoming a Beatle and how that impacts the family. And then the fourth chapter is the hard times, which is when the chickens come home to roost, which is that be careful of how high you climb because you're going to fall. And the fifth chapter deals with the healing of their marriage and Scott's death. They lost a son. And then the sixth chapter is Grace, just where they landed.
Wow.
So that's the story in a nutshell.
It sounds amazing. I can't wait to see the rest of the chapters and for this to be out in the world.
So. Thanks a lot. We're going to try to finish strong. The first 4 are done, and we're still finishing the last 2.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so excited. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And it was so nice to talk to you.
Yeah. Forgive me for eating a banana while we talk.
Oh my God. No, I have your banana. I'm so glad.